You know, usually when we think about how major conflicts start, we expect this really clear, undeniable spark. I mean, if you read a traditional history textbook, the timeline is always so obvious.
Yeah, like an army crosses a border or a treaty gets ripped up on stage.
Exactly. The conventional machinery of war just kind of grinds into motion, peace yesterday, war today. But, and this is what we're digging into for this deep dive, when you step into the modern era of, nuclear diplomacy and covert sabotage, that clear timeline completely vanishes.
It really does. You find yourself looking at a conflict landscape that's, well, it's entirely insubtle to the naked eye.
Right. It's the absolute definition of a shadow war, where the most devastating maneuvers happen without a single shot being fired. And that invisible conflict is exactly what we're exploring with you today. We're looking at this highly volatile, just absolutely critical window in history, roughly 2001 to 2009.
Where the U.S. and Iran went from, honestly, a surprising moment of quiet cooperation straight to the brink of a futuristic shadow war.
Yeah, and to do this, we're pulling insights from a comprehensive dossier of declassified records and vetted scholarship on U.S.-Iran relations. We're going to understand how this specific 8-year window birthed the modern nuclear anxiety we live with today and, inaugurated this terrifying new era of global cyber warfare.
And I'm thrilled to be here to walk through this with you because this period really is the crucible for so much of the modern geopolitical landscape. The rules of engagement for the 21st century were quietly rewritten in the dark over these 8 years.
So we have to start in late 2001, right after the devastating September 11th attacks in the U.S.
Right, exactly.
And I think the common assumption is that the relationship between Washington and Tehran at that time was just, pure, unadulterated hostility.
Which is a fair assumption given the history, but
Yeah.
Looking at the historical record, there was actually this flickering moment of pragmatic alignment.
Wait, alignment?
Yeah, Iran and the United States were quietly cooperating against the Taliban. It was a brief, incredibly unique window.
That is wild to think about now.
It is, but you have to remember the broader geopolitical map of the region at that exact moment. I mean, Iran and the Taliban, they're operating in neighboring Afghanistan, and they were deeply opposed to one another.
Ideological and strategic adversaries.
Precisely. So in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when the U.S. moved against the Taliban and al-Qaeda, American and Iranian interests momentarily overlapped.
They actually shared a common enemy.
They did. And, this wasn't just a theoretical alignment. There was real, actual back-channel communication.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there was shared intelligence regarding troop movements and safe havens. I mean, Iranian officials even offered search and rescue assistance for downed American pilots.
For American pilots, that's huge.
It was. For a very brief moment, it really looked like this shared enemy might create a foundation for a thaw in a relationship that had basically been frozen solid since the 1979 revolution.
But, and this is where it gets crazy, that thaw snapped back faster than anyone could have predicted, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was whiplash.
Because in January 2002, President George W. Bush delivers his State of the Union address, and he explicitly names Iran as part of an axis of evil alongside Iraq and North Korea.
Which was just a massive pivot.
I mean, I try to imagine this for the listener. It's like, imagine helping a neighbor put out a fire in their yard, right? You're passing buckets of water, and the very next day they put up a giant billboard in their front yard calling you the neighborhood menace.
That's a great way to put it.
Why make that pivot? How did this abrupt whiplash impact the relationship moving forward when the cooperation was actually working on the ground?
Well, the whiplash was profound. To understand it, you have to look at the massive bureaucratic and really strategic disconnect within the U.S. government at that time.
A disconnect between who?
Between the people handling the tactical, on-the-ground intelligence sharing in Afghanistan and the people writing the overarching grand strategy back in Washington.
Oh.
The Bush administration, in the wake of 9/11, they adopted this macro-level worldview focused heavily on state sponsors of terrorism and the fear of weapons of mass destruction.
So they were looking past the immediate tactical situation.
Exactly. From Washington's perspective, Iran's historical support for proxy groups, like Hezbollah and Hamas, and their suspected pursuit of advanced weapons that completely overrode the micro-level cooperation against the Taliban.
They saw a rogue state that could, theoretically hand a WMD to a non-state actor.
Right. So the axis of evil rhetoric was this deliberate, sweeping, strategic framing that unfortunately completely ignored the nuance of the back-channel cooperation.
And how did that play out inside Iran? Because I can't imagine it went over well.
It was devastating, especially for the Iranian moderates who had advocated for this cooperation.
Because they stuck their necks out.
They really did. They had taken a massive political risk by reaching out to Washington, and their reward was being publicly branded as the ultimate enemy.
Wow. So it just instantly chilled any hopes of rapprochement.
Instantly.
Hmm.
It deeply reinforced the mutual mistrust that had been brewing for decades, and it proved to the Iranian hardliners, at least in their own minds, that the United States could never be trusted.
Regardless of how much Tehran cooperated.
Exactly. The rhetoric just locked both sides into this defensive, hostile posture, and traditional diplomacy was essentially frozen.
Which means the conflict moves right out of the public diplomatic sphere and straight into the shadows.
Into the dark, yeah.
And that leads us to a massive bombshell later in 2002 that changes the world's focus entirely. An Iranian exile group comes forward and exposes a closely guarded secret.
The huge secret.
Yeah, that Iran has a uranium enrichment site at Natanz and a heavy water project at Iraq.
And this was a tectonic shift in international relations. I mean, suddenly the abstract fear of proliferation became very concrete, very geographic.
We went from broad political rhetoric to actual satellite photos and physical coordinates.
We did. The nuclear crisis had officially begun.
So let's break down those two facilities for the listener, because we hear enrichment and heavy water thrown around a lot on the news as like interchangeable buzzwords, but they represent two completely different things, right?
Very different, yes.
So Natanz is the enrichment site. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so Natanz is where the uranium enrichment happens. To build a nuclear weapon, you need fissile material. And one way to get that is by taking natural uranium gas and spinning it in machines called centrifuges.
At incredibly high speeds, I imagine.
Supersonic speeds, yeah. This separates the isotopes and purifies or enriches the uranium.
Okay, got it.
Now, at low levels of enrichment, it's just fuel for a civilian power plant. But if you keep spinning it, purifying it up to roughly 90%, you get highly enriched weapons-grade uranium.
And Natanz was built for this.
Natanz was a massive facility built to house thousands of these spinning centrifuges.
Okay, and then the exile group also exposed Iraq, which is a heavy water project. Why is heavy water important?
Heavy water is crucial because it represents a secondary, entirely separate pathway to a nuclear bomb.
A whole different path.
Right. A heavy water nuclear reactor uses a specific type of water where the hydrogen atoms have an extra neutron to moderate the nuclear reaction.
Okay.
And the byproduct of running a heavy water reactor, fueled by natural uranium, is spent fuel that contains plutonium.
Oh, and plutonium is the other way to make a bomb.
Exactly. Plutonium can be extracted and used as the core of a nuclear weapon.
So by exposing Natanz and Iraq, the world suddenly realizes Iran is secretly developing the infrastructure for both potential pathways to a bomb, uranium, and plutonium.
Yes, and to add to the alarm, these sites were heavily fortified.
Like underground.
Very much so. Natanz, for instance, wasn't just some warehouse on the surface. It was buried deep underground, protected by thick layers of concrete and earth.
To hide from satellites.
Designed specifically to evade satellite detection and withstand conventional airstrikes.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let me stop you right there. Because if they are building massive underground bunkers filled with centrifuges and heavy water reactors, does having those facilities mean they actually had a nuclear bomb right then and there? Because it sounds incredibly advanced.
That is the exact question intelligence agencies worldwide were scrambling to answer in 2002.
I bet.
But the short answer is no. Having those physical facilities did not mean they had a bomb.
Okay.
There is a massive fundamental difference between having a nuclear capability and making the actual decision to build a weapon.
Capability versus intent.
Precisely. The centrifuges at Natanz, the physical tools to purify uranium, they represent capability.
Right, the tools are there.
They provide the latency and the mechanical leverage. But U.S. intelligence and the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they maintain a strict distinction between possessing those tools and the political or military intent from the highest levels of leadership to actually cross the finish line and assemble a warhead.
But the intent part is key.
It is. And whether Iran actually intended to build a bomb was, and honestly remains, a genuinely disputed historical question.
But I imagine the sheer fact that the capability existed in secret was enough to trigger a global panic.
Absolutely. Because once that massive hardened infrastructure is in place, the window to stop a bomb from being built shrinks dramatically. You no longer have years of warning. You might only have months.
Which brings us to the most vital metric of this entire shadow war. Because, like you said, intent is invisible.
Right. You can't measure intent.
You can't put a satellite in space and take a photograph of what a leader is thinking. You can't inspect a thought.
No, you cannot.
So the U.S. and the international community had to focus on the one thing they could actually measure, which is the timeline.
The math of the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And the central metric of that math is a concept known as breakout time.
Okay, so breakout time. Let me see if I can simplify this for the listener. It's basically measuring how fast a chef could bake a cake if they suddenly decided to, based entirely on how many ingredients are already prepped in the bowls and how many ovens are preheated in the kitchen.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the nuclear context, your prepped ingredients are the stockpiles of low-enriched uranium, and the preheated ovens are the spinning centrifuges.
Okay. That makes sense.
So breakout time is the estimated time it would take to take that existing stockpile, spin it through those existing centrifuges, and produce enough weapons-grade material for exactly one nuclear weapon, assuming the political decision to do so was made today.
It's all about velocity then. It's not about whether the chef actually wants to bake the cake today. It's about if the chef wakes up tomorrow morning and gives the order, how long does the world have to react?
Velocity is the perfect word. The crisis wasn't just about what Iran possessed at that exact second in the underground halls of Natanz. It was about how fast they could pivot. If a country has a breakout time of, say, 5 years, the international community has plenty of time for diplomacy, sanctions, or interventions.
They can breathe a little.
Exactly. But if that breakout time shrinks to a year or a few months or a few weeks, that's when the panic sets in.
The clock is ticking.
This ticking clock became the absolute obsession of global intelligence. Every diplomatic move, every financial sanction, every covert action for the next decade was designed to manipulate that single variable, to push the breakout time further away.
But here is the massive problem, right? The physical sites are buried under layers of concrete. The axis of evil speech has completely alienated the Iranian leadership and frozen traditional diplomacy.
Right. The doors are closed.
And the breakout clock is ticking loudly in the ears of Western intelligence as more and more centrifuges are installed. The U.S. and Israel needed a way to slow down those centrifuges without triggering a war. But they couldn't just launch a conventional airstrike, could they?
No. A conventional military strike on Iranian soil, dropping bunker buster bombs from fighter jets, that would likely ignite a massive, unpredictable regional war.
Right. The risks were just too high.
Astronomical risks. They needed a surgical, completely invisible solution that could destroy the infrastructure without leaving a traditional fingerprint.
And their solution was something the world had never seen before. It honestly sounds like pure science fiction, but between roughly 2007 and 2010, the U.S. and Israel mount a covert cyber campaign known as Stuxnet.
Stuxnet is a watershed moment in human history. It is hard to overstate how revolutionary this malware was.
I mean, when most people hear the word cyber attack, they think of data breaches, right? Credit card numbers stolen, hospital websites taken offline, embarrassing emails leaked to the press.
Sure, a crime of information.
Exactly. But Stuxnet wasn't stealing data. The Stuxnet malware was code that physically wrecked thousands of spinning Iranian centrifuges at Natanz.
It crossed the digital to physical barrier.
Wait, so code, just invisible ones and zeros, was used to physically destroy heavy industrial machinery. This really sounds like science fiction. Are we looking at the birth of modern cyber warfare right here?
We absolutely are. It was a digital weapon designed to cause kinetic, physical destruction.
But how? How does software physically break a machine made of concrete and metal?
It requires a profound level of malicious elegance.
Malicious elegance, I like that.
Well, Stuxnet was incredibly complex because it utilized multiple zero-day exploits.
Which are vulnerabilities nobody knows about yet.
Right, vulnerabilities in software that the original creators didn't even know existed. But its true genius was its specific target. Stuxnet wasn't designed to shut down the computers in the front office. It was designed to hunt for the programmable logic controllers, or PLCs.
Okay, PLCs. What are PLCs?
PLCs are the specialized industrial computers that bridge the gap between software and hardware. They manage the physical world.
Like what kind of stuff?
They control the valves on oil pipelines, the temperature in chemical plants, and, crucially, the rotational speeds of the centrifuges at Natanz.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Stuxnet was programmed to look for a very specific configuration of Siemens PLCs controlling specific frequency converter drives running at the exact speeds used by Iranian centrifuges.
That is incredibly specific.
It was a digital sniper rifle. If it landed on your laptop at home, it would do absolutely nothing.
It would just sit there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Only activated when it found the specific environment of the Natanz enrichment hall.
But Natanz is a top-secret, heavily fortified underground bunker. I mean, it's not connected to the public internet. It's air-gapped.
Yes, completely isolated.
So how does a piece of malware even get inside a facility that is physically isolated from the outside world?
That is the crucial hurdle of attacking an air-gapped system. You can't just email a malicious link to someone inside.
Right.
You have to rely on human vectors to bridge the physical gap. And intelligence suggests the malware was initially introduced via infected USB thumb drives.
Are you serious? So an unwitting contractor, or like an engineer, brings a seemingly normal flash drive from the outside world, plugs it into a machine inside the secure perimeter, and patient zero is established.
Yes, exactly. And from there, Stuxnet would quietly spread through the local network, just hiding itself completely from the standard antivirus and monitoring software.
Creeping through the system.
Quietly creeping. And once it located the specific PLCs controlling the centrifuges, it went to work. It would subtly and maliciously change the rotational speeds of the rotors.
And a centrifuge has to spin at what? Supersonic speeds to enrich uranium, right? The physics involved must be incredibly delicate.
Incredibly delicate. They're perfectly balanced cylinders spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute.
Wow.
Any slight imbalance, any vibration at all, causes catastrophic failure. So Stuxnet would take control of the PLCs and force the centrifuges to speed up to highly unsafe levels and then abruptly slow them down.
Oh, just tearing them apart.
Literally. It created immense physical stress until the aluminum tubes literally tore themselves apart from the inside.
But wouldn't the Iranian scientists in the control room see the speeds fluctuating wildly on their computer screens and just, I don't know, hit the emergency stop button?
You would think so, but that is actually the most terrifying part of the Stuxnet code. While it was ripping the physical machines apart in the enrichment halls, the malware was simultaneously feeding pre-recorded, perfectly normal data back to the human operators in the control room.
Wait, really? It was lying to them.
It was lying to them. It was a sophisticated digital illusion.
That is mind-blowing.
The operators are looking at their monitors, and the monitors say the pressure is stable, the speed is nominal, everything is perfectly fine.
Meanwhile,
In the next room, millions of dollars of critical infrastructure are destroying themselves.
that's insane.
It was psychological warfare as much as physical sabotage. The Iranian scientists just didn't know what was happening. They didn't know if they had purchased bad parts on the black market, if their engineers were incompetent, or if the laws of physics had simply stopped working in their facility.
They must have been losing their minds.
They ended up firing people and halting operations out of pure paranoia. It slowed their breakout time down significantly because they were paralyzed by these mysterious, invisible failures.
It just completely rewrites the playbook for how nations fight. You don't need a pilot in the sky anymore. You don't need a physical payload. You just need an incredibly brilliant engineer at a keyboard to achieve the exact same strategic outcome.
It proved that critical infrastructure, power grids, water treatment plants, nuclear facilities, they could be destroyed without conventional military force.
Wow.
But it also opened Pandora's box. Because once Stuxnet was out in the wild and eventually discovered by cybersecurity researchers, the concept was proven to the world.
Right, the secret was out.
Every major power and every rogue state suddenly realized they were vulnerable to exactly the same kind of attack, and that they needed to develop offensive cyber capabilities of their own.
It is a staggering journey when you look at the entire 8-year window we've explored today. We started in 2001 with that fleeting, almost surreal moment of quiet, pragmatic cooperation against the Taliban.
Right, a very fragile trust.
And we saw that fragile trust absolutely shatter with the broader strategic stroke of the axis of evil speech, which crushed moderates and locked both sides into a posture of deep suspicion.
Which then, of course, paved the way for the bombshell exposure of Natanz in Iraq by the Exile Group, forcing the world to confront the physical reality of a potential nuclear program.
Yeah, and we saw how the impossibility of measuring human intent forced intelligence agencies to rely on the terrifying math of breakout time, constantly monitoring the ingredients in the ovens.
The ticking clock.
Exactly. And finally, we witnessed how the desperate need to push that breakout clock backward led to the dawn of a completely new kind of conflict with Stuxnet.
And, this intense period of digital sabotage, combined with the crippling economic sanctions that accompanied it, It perfectly sets the stage for the next massive chapter in global history.
Because you can't just keep doing that forever, right?
Exactly. You cannot sustain that level of maximum covert pressure indefinitely without it eventually boiling over into a hot war.
It creates a pressure cooker that has to be vented.
Precisely. The terror and exhaustion of this shadow war lead directly into the grueling, multi-year diplomatic effort led by President Obama and Iranian President Rouhani in the 2010s.
Okay.
All of the deep mistrust generated during this crucial 2001 to 2009 window had to be carefully navigated by diplomats trying to find a way out of the stalemate. It is what eventually leads to the JCPOA nuclear deal in 2015. They had to figure out how to put a lid on the enrichment capability using diplomacy and inspections, rather than malware and sabotage.
Yeah, you really cannot understand the stakes of that nuclear deal without understanding the mechanics of Stuxnet and the fallout of the axis of evil. They are inextricably linked.
The diplomacy was a direct response to the sheer danger of the shadow war that preceded it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over long after you finish listening. Think back to that idea of how conflicts start, the armies crossing borders, and the visible declarations of war.
The old way of doing things.
Right. If a highly sophisticated computer virus can infiltrate an air-gapped facility, hijack industrial controllers, and physically destroy a nation's nuclear infrastructure without a single soldier crossing a border or a single jet dropping a bomb, how do we even begin to define an active war in the 21st century?
It is the defining legal and ethical question of our time, honestly, and international law is still struggling to catch up to the reality of the code.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Understanding these hidden turning points, these exact moments where the rules of the game quietly changed forever, is the ultimate shortcut to being truly well-informed. Keep diving deep.